Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Making Strides podcast. Today we have another special guest. We have Brad Wells. He's a good friend of mine here in Fort Collins, Colorado, in the running community. I should have tried to reflect on how we first met before we started recording. Man,
yeah.
Where did we first meet?
I don't know. I think I remember one of my first memories of you is doing one of the Towers time trials, and you brought a GoPro. And
yeah, I totally
you were
have
talking to me
that
for a while.
I'm going to link that in the show notes. I have that exact video. That's a good video.
Got GoPro for a while. You're struggling up Towers.
I figured it was some group run or something, or through some mutual friends in the community or something. Anyway, so Brad is, I'm going to have him introduce himself, but he's a professional in the meteorology realm. And so we just thought it'd be a cool kind of idea for an episode to talk about all things meteorology, weather, running. We're really just like we kind of sometimes revolve our lives a little bit around checking the weather multiple times per day, trying to plan our runs and training. And I figured it'd be cool to pick some, a professional's brain on some of these questions. So anyway, Brad, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you do professionally.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. And it's nice to meet you, Adam. So I moved to Fort Collins in 2012. So it's been almost 10 years since I moved here. I moved here for grad school at Colorado State University in atmospheric science. So I've always sort of been a weather nerd for a lot of my life. I was always pretty obsessed with thunderstorms, storm chasing, stuff like that. And I actually came here and I studied and I did air quality research actually in my grad school. And after graduating, I really liked Colorado. I moved here from Wisconsin, and I decided that, I kind of want to stick around here. I really like the outdoor opportunities in Colorado and I'll just say the American West in general. It's just so great out here. So I got one job initially in Fort Collins where I was looking at extreme precipitation and analyzing basically thunderstorms and what they do to the landscape as they rain a lot. Short answer of it. And then as of a couple of years ago, I work at another company now called Weatherflow. We make basically like professional grade weather stations that you can put into your own backyard and get your own machine learned weather forecast tailor-made for your own backyard, which is pretty cool. In the office that I work in, we kind of do the forecasting part of that. We do the machine learning and forecast verification. So we look at all those and we are expanding a huge network of weather stations and trying to basically make weather predictions, I should say, more tailor-made to the individual. It's a pretty exciting company to work at. And for me, for running, it's kind of funny how, you started out saying that, everybody's kind of in this community sort of intrinsically connected to the weather. That was a big part for me, just, getting outside. I will say one part, in terms of my running, before I moved out here, I did half marathons and stuff like that, but I always thought I'd be one of those like one and done marathon typers just to say I did it. And then I did a trail marathon out here and was like, hey, it actually wasn't the like insane sufferfest that I thought it was going to be. And I started gradually moving on to ultra marathons and more trail races and everything. And, one of the big reasons I really started getting into trail running too, is turns out it's a really great distraction for homework in grad school. You don't have to do homework if you can run an extra 8 miles in the evening. So that's kind of what got me here. But yeah, as AJ said, I mean, we go back for a while. I mean, probably 7 or 8 years now.
Yep.
I'll pace you in Run Rabbit.
Yeah, pace me. Well, you paced me to a DNF. No, that was my fault.
I was the reason, pretty much. Yeah.
No. You were there. You got to witness the DNF happen live. So that is an episode. If anybody's interested in my reflections on that exact DNF, there is an episode for that. But yeah, what are you training for right now? Or what do you want to train for?
Yeah, so I'm training for Never Summer 100K. So you know, that's yeah, you and me both. Yeah, so yeah, 100 kilometer trail race up in the mountains west of Fort Collins. That's the big one. And then also about a month from now, I have the Golden Gate 3030, which everyone gets really excited and thinks I'm going to be running an ultra marathon across the Golden Gate Bridge. But I just want to set that rumor straight that it's in Golden Gate State Park, Colorado, which is also super beautiful. And I'm sort of treating that more as a almost like a longer run training for Never Summer that I'm paying a lot of money for.
It's expensive.
As much as I love trail running, I'm also super lazy. And so sometimes I have to get those spring races under my belt just to get myself out of the house and actually running a decent amount and not just when I feel like it. So those are the two big ones. And I'm looking for a fall race. I haven't really come up with one yet. My plan was to do Run Rabbit Run again in September, but I actually have a wedding I'm going to be going to that weekend. So that one's kind of off the table here, but I'd like to, you know, get another fall race in.
Yeah, sweet. Well, we're going to start hitting you with some questions. Adam, you want to start with one?
Yeah, sure. This one's our first one is great for me right now because I've been looking at this a lot. So Saturday I have a 5K up in Boulder, and then the week after that I'm putting on my own track race, just a 5K here. So been every day looking at the extended forecast, you know, just crazy concerned about it. So can you speak towards kind of the accuracy of looking at that 5, 10, 14-day forecast and trying to plan for things around that?
Yeah, so weather forecasting has made a lot of strides in the past decade or so. And when you get to about 5 days, that is still sort of I would say kind of a limit to how accurate you can get. 5 days, you can get a fairly accurate picture of, what might be happening, in the future. But beyond that, you're starting to get way more into I'd call it like a very broad brush stroke of like what you're actually looking at. And it also, it really depends on the season as well. It's really tough this time in the spring. Up here in Fort Collins, I swear every single May I've lived here, there's been one big snowstorm, at some point in early May. It's very difficult this time of year to actually predict out further than, 4, 5, 6 days, just because the atmosphere is just that much more, volatile, I'll call it, versus like the summer where, here on the Front Range, in the summer, you can sort of fairly accurately guess that about 7 to 8 days from now, it's probably going to be sunny and hot still. Or in the winter, it might be sunny but really windy or whatever. So these like kind of shoulder seasons like spring and fall are pretty difficult once you get beyond like 5 or 6 days. But you can still glean some information off of about a week forecast, at least like the very general pictures. You're not going to really get anything more accurate than that, but it's worth looking at and actually seeing for yourself how the forecast changes on a day-to-day basis as the event starts to get closer and closer.
Gotcha. Would that be regionally dependent at all?
A little bit, yeah. You know, and I'll probably say this a million times in this podcast, but the mountains just make weather prediction that much more difficult. You know, if you're in somewhere like, you know, the southern plains, like in Texas right now, you know, you have thunderstorms and stuff coming up, but in general, like you're right now regionally, like your forecasts, you know, might be a little bit more you know, stable on a day-to-day basis.
Gotcha.
So then on a related note, what are the best places to kind of get this forecast? Like, I know we've talked about weather.gov, especially for the mountains, because you can kind of get that you can get that like altitude specific forecast. If people aren't familiar with it, you can like click on the map and it'll like the middle of where you clicked, it'll give you the weather at the altitude of that location, or you know what I mean?
Exactly.
But do you have any favorite websites or apps or places? Well, I want to hear what your favorite weather app is, but I also want to hear just in general where you're going to go to try and get the most accurate. And obviously you have other skills and tools probably, but where would you go knowing what you know if you had layperson resources to get the most accurate weather forecast?
Oh, totally. So, you know, one thing I'll say right off the bat is that weather models are massive. They run on some of the biggest supercomputers in the world. And they take a ton of computing power and a lot of time. And your average, you know, forecast app isn't actually running their own weather models or even using like their own forecasters for, you know, for giving you a forecast in whatever location you want to look at. It's simply too expensive for like your average company to run their own weather model. Basically all the weather models out there are run by the government. It's really the only place you can get them. And so I guess where I'm going with this is that basically all these, you know, whatever weather app you use on your phone, they're all pretty much using the same forecast data. They don't have the resources to run their own in-house model usually. They might be able to tweak some parameters here and there. And so when you're talking about like your favorite weather apps, I love going to weather.gov, as you said. There's still like a human element in like the actual government forecast. They still use actual weather forecasters that use these models as well as their own skill, you know, as these sort of tools to actually give you the most accurate forecast you can get. You know, not to disparage just looking at models here. They're outstanding. They're, you know, huge monuments to just like how good humans are at computing and forecasting things. But a lot of times, you know, if you're looking at your iPhone app, like your iPhone weather app, a lot of times that's just spitting out one model and there's no human skill involved, and it's giving you that number for whatever latitude, longitude, location you're looking at. And that, I mean, that's still fairly accurate, but I do love having some sort of human element to what I'm looking at, especially up in the mountains. Even the best weather forecast models usually don't have a resolution that can like adequately you know, forecast every single part of, you know, like a, you know, mountain terrain basically. You know, you might be like averaging terrain and terrain features across like multiple miles, so you won't get something that's incredibly accurate. So that's where I do still believe that there's a true human element to forecasting. And weather.gov, you know, again, is a great resource. The other one I've actually found is if you can still get it in the summer, is a lot of times in the mountain areas, you have specific forecasts from forecasters in the winter for ski areas. They actually have, you know, real weather forecasters, you know, looking and diagnosing what's going on. And, you know, again, that gets a little more difficult in the summer. A lot of times those forecasts kind of drop off because, you know, obviously no one's skiing anymore. But if you're a skier, sometimes your favorite website for looking at ski forecasts might actually be able to help you with looking at running conditions as well. Another one I actually really like, and this is, I guess, Colorado specifically, but you might run across something similar if you're in another state. But the Colorado Avalanche Information Center, the CAIC website, actually runs their own versions of models on their website if you go to the forecast area, and that can give you a pretty good idea of looking at temperature and wind and everything like that in a specific region. Some of them are tailor-made directly at for certain ski slopes or regions. But I mean, you can, if you're, let's say you're going up to Summit County in Colorado to go for, a mountain run, it can give you a pretty good idea of what's going on in that area. But, in general, like, I will say whatever you're using is probably at this point, and how apps are made for, especially for weather forecasting, in general, you've got a pretty good picture of what's going on.
So basically pick your weather app based on which ones you just, almost like your running shoes. Like you just pick your running shoes based on the ones that you're just the most comfortable with, the ones that you just like, right?
Yeah,
rather than anything super technical about it, right? You can see a previous episode for our shoe episode for anybody who's listening. 2 episodes actually on shoes. But so like whichever apps have the best widgets or presenting, like I don't know, I feel like Weather Underground does a good job at giving a lot of like the stuff I typically look at. Just makes it easily accessible, easy to read. They got rid of some widgets a couple months ago that really pissed me off, but hopefully eventually, I keep praying. I'm like, they're gonna eventually bring these back, please. But besides that, that's what I like to use. So I guess I'll just keep using that.
Search around too. I mean, what I like to do, if I'm planning a big mountain run, I'm not looking at like one website. I'm oftentimes looking at multiple. Totally. And that can not only give you a good idea of what's going to happen, but can also give you, sometimes that gives you a really good idea of how uncertain the forecast is. Especially this time of year. Like speaking to what I was saying to you, Adam, like if you go onto different apps, you can actually see sometimes pretty big differences in, even the 3 or 4 day forecast, what's going to happen. So sometimes that's really good at, at least giving you an idea of like how uncertain the forecast is coming up.
Yeah, that's great to know. We have in June, we're going on a backpacking trip in the Sangre de Cristos. So I'll definitely be referencing this podcast again, probably around that time, and figuring out what do we really need to look at and different places to look so we can be as prepared as possible.
Yeah, and if you need any further assistance, let me know. I'd love to help with that.
Will do.
Adam, hit up the next question. Take it away.
Yeah. So once we get that forecast and we figure out where we want to look for it, how can what specific things should we look at to best prepare accordingly? So I guess building off the, our backpacking trip, what do we need to look for so we can be prepared?
Yeah, I mean, so this is one of those things, if backpacking is definitely one of those things where I try to prepare for as much as possible, at least given the amount of space that I have. For running, you can kind of get away with a little bit more, I'll say risking it in terms of what you're bringing and or sometimes most importantly, what you're not bringing on a run. It's one thing I've noticed is that, every runner is different. Actually, AJ and I have talked about this a lot. We're sort of the polar opposites in terms of temperature when we run. AJ likes it really hot for some stupid reason, and I'm
to be clear, I'm sure we both prefer similar running conditions. Yeah. It's just I'm less tolerant to
Exactly.
cold, and I would
Mhm.
prefer heat, and you're less tolerant to heat and you'd prefer cold.
Yes.
And I think you're more of the norm.
I die when it gets too hot, and I know it's because mostly I'm a baby, but it seems to be that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
But and I guess what I'm saying there is that really try to tailor what you're looking for to what bugs you when you run, or even the opposite, like what you want to train in. For me, like I sometimes, like, especially like Never Summer is up in the Alpine, but it can get pretty hot during that race. And so sometimes when I'm looking at the forecast, I will look for things specific to that. I'll look for, hey, when are temperatures supposed to be hotter, and when am I going to go out and get some runs in the heat and in the sun, to try to start training up and get prepared for the potential conditions at a race. But I would say the big ones are temperature and humidity. Humidity can really affect how you
Feels like.
perceive it. Yeah, exactly. I mean, everyone kind of knows about the heat index, or what is it, AccuWeather's what's it called, Real Feel or something like that, where they kind of, I think it's just a fancier heat index, but
Yeah.
so that's like a big thing is how humid the temperature is. And in the summer, cloud cover is another big one. I was looking at, didn't really look at the study too much, but I was they're looking at runners in direct sunlight versus cloud cover, and they said it's like if you're running in direct sunlight, it's almost like adding in an extra 30 seconds per mile in terms of your time, just in terms of effort. The direct sun, especially up here, in the mountainous areas where you're above a lot of the atmosphere, that's a big one. The other thing here, and we might get into this a little bit more later, is more and more now over the past few years, one that kind of goes unnoticed, is air quality and air quality forecasts. Here in the Front Range, you have ozone in the summer, and you have haze from what seems like an endless fire season now.
PM 2.5.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
PM 2.5, PM 10 if you're really close to the fire, and ozone. Those are big things to look at, especially in the summer. Running in high ozone can be pretty bad for your lungs, and trying to run when those air quality issues are minimized, like in the morning, is a good example. Running then versus the afternoon.
Some people were saying last year when the air quality was crap. Okay, so like PM 2.5, obviously, like ozone, my understanding was that ozone is more likely going to aggravate your respiratory system if you're predisposed to that. And then PM 2.5 is more from a cardiac perspective, and then maybe even like, I think it's mainly cardiac and inflammatory or something like that. Like because those particles are so small, they kind of infiltrate your alveoli in your lung and whatnot.
Totally.
But anyway, with regard to what you just said, I thought some mornings it was like when it's colder in the morning in the summer, somebody was telling me that like the cool air keeps the particles down, and then sometimes when it warms up finally, they'll lift away. Is that true or not?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think like people in the Front Range definitely know about the Denver brown cloud, and that can actually happen a lot in the winter. And you're on the right track. I'll say is that like a lot of that can happen with inversions right next to the mountains. Yeah. So basically what happens with an inversion is that as you go up in altitude, the air actually warms instead of cools, which can be counterintuitive. Anytime you're hiking up a mountain in general, once you get to the top of a mountain, it's pretty dang cold compared to where your car's parked. So it's sort of the
usually
opposite of what you think.
It's usually textbook is like 3 degrees cooler per 1,000 feet or something like that, 3 to 5, something like that. Yeah.
And that's a good general rule. And that works for, a lot of cases, but like, especially in the winter, you get inversions. So basically you have warmer air on top of cooler air, and cooler air tends to be denser and wants to sink, versus warmer air that wants to rise. So it's basically a stable atmosphere is what that's called. When it's too stable like that, the air doesn't really mix vertically. So, LA is another great example of this, where you have like the ocean and then you have the mountains to the east. So you basically have air that can't mix. And so, think about all that exhaust from cars driving on I-25 and everything, like basically not getting moved out of the Front Range. And that can create some pretty dangerous ozone levels. And you're right. Like, I mean, it's mostly for people that are predisposed, but on those days where you have really high ozone, that can really aggravate your lungs, especially when you're exerting yourself, right? So that's something you want to really look out for.
Well, you've kind of brought up inversions already.
Yeah.
This question was more so, actually, Adam was the genius who thought of asking you this, but we're kind of wondering if there's any way we can predict, or an inversion. Like, hey, I know typically here in Fort Collins, the inversions that I've experienced are like, I wake up and I look outside and it's like a dense fog. Like I could barely see my fence at the end of my yard, and I'm like, oh crap, I need, we need to go up right now. And
exactly.
And then you run to the trailhead, or here in Fort Collins, we're blessed with the reservoir, Centennial Road, where we can climb. I can, like, from my house, I can be 500 feet up in like 6 minutes by taking the road up to the reservoir. So sometimes, and I've taken some, pictures of inversions up at the reservoir, but like, is there any way to like predict that more in maybe the night before, or any, I don't know, at all predicting that?
So that's a tough one in terms of predicting for the next day. There are ways to predict that, but that kind of gets into the weeds of really examining weather models.
So you can't predict it, like the layperson just can't.
Yeah, that's a tough one to actually predict. You can kind of glean info, like kind of what you said earlier, like, sometimes like weather.gov will have like, if you look at their forecast, they'll say like patchy fog or dense fog the next morning. That can give you a good idea of, if there's, something there. But in general, it's pretty tough. Inversions don't offer the most visible cues most of the time. Day of, oftentimes the best way to determine if you have an inversion is go for a run in the mountains and see what happens as you run up.
Yeah, I have a better question related to exactly that. Some days I get out, like I've been on towers multiple times, speaking of where we met. But I'll be like, wow, this is like, we're entering like this dense layer of fog. Like, I wonder where the top of this is. There's only like 600 more feet of climbing on this trail. Am I going to get above these clouds? That would be sick. Yeah. So then you like start sprinting up the mountain before the fog starts lifting, and you're like, there have been times where I've stood at the top of Horsetooth or stood at the top of Towers Road, and I look up and I'm like, there's the sky, but I'm not above the clouds. Yep. Like I'm so close. and like I did, but is there any way to like look at where that cloud ceiling is?
That's another, it's harder to determine like where the actual cloud ceiling might be. You can look at satellite data as a very, sometimes you can get some info on cloud ceiling there. But that's another thing that you kind of have to dig further into the models for. That's not typically something that you just get on a forecast. I know what you mean though. I
Okay.
mean, one time I got to the top of Horsetooth, and I was lucky enough that, like, I swear, like, only the last like 2 feet of Horsetooth rock stuck above the clouds. It
Yeah.
was incredible, but it was also super dizzying because it
Yeah.
was literally like standing on clouds, and it felt like I had like fallen off of like a jet airplane or something. It was cool, but actually very disorienting.
Yeah.
Um, but
Cool.
and sometimes those cloud ceilings can change, as the morning goes on. As the sun starts heating the top of those clouds, the top can start evaporating off, and you get, it's pretty much how fog disappears, is you get that warming, and it basically evaporates off the fog layer. And the same with those kind of low-lying clouds.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's something you're really only going to see like early in the morning.
Typically, at least here. If we're up in the Pacific Northwest or something, it might be a little different. But yeah, here, you have like the radiant cooling overnight that kind of drops temperatures down to the dew point, and you get 100% humidity and fog forming. And then as the sun rises, basically the short answer is the temperature warms up again, and all of a sudden your regular temperature isn't the dew point temperature anymore. So yeah,
that makes sense.
We
got a late inversion once. We didn't even know it existed, but basically popping over Buchanan Pass, it was mid-morning, kind of sun's been out for hours now. And we right at the top of the pass, we were like, we got to we started looking east. We're approaching it from the west to east. And the second we hit the top, we were like just clouds all on the other side. It was super cool. But that was a pretty
awesome
later in the day inversion we got lucky with, but on that backpacking trip. Anyway, so we have just a couple more minutes to just run through a couple of these last questions.
Yeah.
Adam, you want to just ask him something next?
Yeah. So this next question I thought of kind of going back to our backpacking trip or any future backpacking trip, when you're up at altitude for an extended period of time, and there's starting to be some clouds coming in. At what point, or is there anything like visually, you can spot where it's like, okay, these are clouds, like we need to descend ASAP. Or we can let this just kind of pass and we're going to be okay.
That's modest a big question this time, or well, I guess coming into summer,
funnel cloud.
For me, generally a big rule of thumb is, the weather can change so quickly up in the mountains. And in general, like if I'm on a hike or a run or something like that up above tree line, it's not always going to be perfect, but in general, I like to have been summited and on my way back down at around noon, heading back towards tree line. Because, one of the big types of clouds you want to look out for are the cumulus clouds, like the puffy clouds that, kind of look like cotton candy. And I'm sure all three of us have many stories of, being up in the mountains and seeing like, there's some clouds, to like literally 45 minutes later being like, oh crap, it's hailing on me now. Like they can form into thunderstorms a lot quicker than you can often realize. And so, those puffy cumulus clouds in the summer can very quickly grow and turn into thunderstorms. So when you start seeing those pop up, a lot of times that's like a very good indication that you might want to start heading back down to, lower elevations. There's other clouds that you can look at too that, might signal that you might be okay. Like those wispy kind of cirrus clouds don't really have that sort of same impact that puffy cumulus clouds have. That might be more of an indication that, if you're just seeing those and less cumulus clouds, you might be, in a better spot. But it's still one of those things where, you want to be you want to be smart and make sure that you're not in a position where you might get hit by a thunderstorm at, 2 or 3 p.m., no matter what kind of clouds or conditions you're looking at.
Cool.
Yeah, definitely. I've read some stories on, what was it, like 14ers.com. I mean, like perfect day. And then all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, it's like they felt like they could have died at any moment.
That's happened to me. And I've definitely thought of the irony if I actually get struck by lightning and die on this stupid trail run that I've done being an atmospheric scientist. I'd probably be embarrassed from the grave. So I know. Yeah.
That's okay. The equivalent of that for us is Adam and I getting injured, which we get injured all the time as PTs. So
same.
Anyway, so we're going to do a little bit of a rapid fire because we have like maybe a couple more questions, but only like 3 minutes left. So rapid fire on these.
Yeah.
So barometer features on tech devices. So basically our barometric altimeter features accurate. So let's just start with altitude. Like rapid fire is should I have the barometric altitude option on my watch? Should I be using that, or is it better to go off like the other option, which is GPS based?
So yeah, really quickly, I would label like the barometer option as more precise than accurate. And thinking back to your high school science there, so you might not have an accurate view of like what your actual above sea level height is, because you're the barometer is literally going off of how far are you from the mean sea level. And that can be affected by the weather and other things. So you're not going to get maybe your most accurate like actual above sea level. But on your run, typically, temperature or pressure doesn't change that much. So if you're looking at like, if you want to look at your total elevation gain or something, like the barometer it's really precise there. And can give you a pretty accurate, if you're just looking at like total elevation change over, let's say like a 2 or 3 mile or 2 or 3 hour run, it's pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about go ahead, Adam.
Yeah. So quick thoughts on the outlook for the summer in terms of wildfires.
Yeah. So I haven't looked much at the long range precipitation outlook, but I have looked at the temperature outlook, and it doesn't look good. Almost the entire US is going to be at or above average, at least forecasted. Above average for temperature. And those always come with some caveats of take it with a grain of salt because they're long range temperature forecasts, over months, but there is still some degree of accuracy there. And it's one of those things, especially with climate change now, like it's going to be one of those, I think moving forward, it's going to sort of be get used to wildfires every summer now. Even if they're not in your neck of the woods, here in Colorado, we get affected by, wildfires in California up to Vancouver, Montana, and everything like that. So, it's one of those where I think this summer could be bad again, but it's still a little difficult to tell, but it might be one of those, like, it's just better to err on the side of it's going to be bad every summer now.
That sucks.
Unfortunately. Yeah, it does really suck.
Yeah. So let's move on to another question here. I actually wanted to go back to the barometric stuff a little bit. I'm just curious, I feel like my barometer on my watch, when I have it set to barometric kind of recording of elevation gained and lost, I feel like it's just kind of all over the place. It needs calibration every single run.
Yes.
It kind of all, I don't know, like, what are your, like, I just default to using the GPS based altitude feature. And that's what I do.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing I've seen too, have a Chorus watch. You know, before we were actually, you know, on this, you know, before we got on, I was just like literally looking at the barometric data, because, you know, it gives me basically like a, you know, altitude basically above sea level. And like right now, it says I'm at 5,112 feet. And this is the same exact like floor that I've slept on. My room is in the other, my bed is in the other room. And all last night it said I was at 5,217 feet. So I mean, that's like a, you know, it's not a lot off, but it's not nothing. And like, so, you know, AJ, for your, you know, your point, like, yeah, if you really want to technically get super accurate with it, you'd have to be calibrating that, you know, maybe every single day. But again, you know, on your average run, as you're going up and down, you know, a mountain or whatever, on a trail run, you know, the barometric pressure change due to weather isn't going to be that big, unless you're literally running as like a giant storm system is coming through or something like that. So like if you want to talk about elevation gain and loss, you know, it's pretty accurate. For the GPS side of things, you actually you have more, I want to say, accuracy but less precision. You know, so when you use your GPS version of looking at altitude, it's you know, using, you know, usually at least 4 GPS satellites to kind of calibrate your height above sea level. And you know, not to get into the specifics there, and I'm not gonna pretend I'm an expert anyways, but like, you introduce a lot of noise using GPS for looking at your altitude. Again, it might be more true to what your actual altitude is, but you might have more kind of jumping around of, you know, I'll just like, if you're 1,000 feet above sea level and you have your watch sitting on your desk, you might have, you know, over the course of 5 or 10 minutes, it jumping around, you know, 5 or 10 feet or something. But, you know, I think a lot of like, you know, like Strava, I know they do some background calculations after you're done running. They actually, I know it's a black box of what they really do, but I think they use actual geo data to kind of correct for those changes in altitude and everything, the errors that you'll get from your watch, which is super helpful. I've done flat runs around Fort Collins, you know, 5-mile flat runs, and sometimes the elevation gain and loss will be like 200 feet different of, you know, over like a 5-mile stretch. It's just, you're not going to get it. It's one of those things where, like, for me, for a lot of the features I have on my running watch, I take them with a grain of salt. And I kind of do the same with altitude. It's just the way it is. It'll give you a good overall picture, but it's not going to be as hyper accurate as you might want it to be.
Just the last, I guess, thing on that topic, unless Adam had anything else, was the storm alert feature. So like, I just looked at mine, set at default to like 4 millibars per 3 hours. Any any drops greater than that in pressure are going to basically alert me that there's a storm coming. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think those are fine. I think, you know, even sort of going back to the topic of looking at clouds when you're up in the Alpine and trying to, you know, see if a storm is coming. My thing is always err on the side of caution and be more conservative. And so on that front, looking at something like a big change in pressure as like a storm alert is, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's obviously much more complicated than just looking at barometric pressure. There's things like, how humid is the upper atmosphere, what other kind of dynamics are in play that might actually create a thunderstorm or something that you don't want to be caught in. It's not typically just a change in pressure, but it is a good starting point. And for something that you have on your watch, it's a good way of letting you know that like the actual atmosphere itself is changing. And like, I don't have the storm alert thing, so I'm wondering like what your thoughts are. Like, do you
I've
get
used
like
it, and
storm alerts when you're like going up, like let's say you're going up a 14er, because you're going to be dropping like at least 3 or 4 millibars, not a lot more going up. So does it give you like a storm alert if you're like going up
honestly, I've had it off okay, mainly when I had like probably back in like maybe 2016, I was using a Phoenix 3. I remember this one time I was up at Glacier Gorge in Rocky Mountain National Park. We were ascending, getting pretty high. Clouds looked pretty terrible. And then it was like beep, beep, beep. And I was like, well, thanks, Captain Obvious.
exactly.
Kind of thing. And then every other time, almost that. So basically 9 times out of 10, though, it's going off. And I'm like, dude, you're drunk. It's sunny out. Like, what's going on? So yeah, okay, it's probably trash. So that's what it sounds like.
To me, it seems more gimmicky than anything. Again, it's not bad. Like it's certainly something that might be useful for looking at changes in weather, but yeah, it does seem more on the gimmicky side of things than giving you real useful information. Typically, if you see a storm system coming in, you'll see it. And you don't need like a change in pressure to alert you that something's coming in.
Yeah, the technology is not good enough to predict something that's probably not already obvious using basic common sense.
Exactly. And I mean, I could see maybe some uses for that if you're, let's say you're, like Adam, if you're doing like a longer backpacking trip and, you're out there for 4 or 5 days. And at that point, you're not quite sure, you don't really, you might not have internet or anything. So you don't have a good way of looking at the forecast, when you're out in the middle of nowhere. I can see it. I can see that having some utility there, but
or I guess
in general,
sometimes you're surrounded by the terrain and it kind of obscures your view of what's happening in the clouds and stuff.
totally.
So like Long's Peak area and Rocky Mountain National Park, like Glacier Gorge is actually probably infamous for this. A lot of the weather kind of, it sounds like, I think, develops on that west side of the Continental Divide, right? And then comes on over. Is that about right?
Yeah.
So I know that it's pretty much like par for the course to get up to the keyhole and then look through the keyhole and see mayhem hell
what's going
on the other side,
exactly.
and then be like, nope, we're turning around. And that's like the universal turnaround point for everybody for Long's Peak. But so I guess in maybe that situation, maybe the watch is like, hey buddy, like pressure is dropping, maybe you can't see it yet, but it should be obvious. But if it's not, here's a little tip.
Exactly. And I guess one more thing too is the pressure doesn't necessarily need to be dropping like that for thunderstorms to move in. That's typically indicative of a larger system that's coming into place.
Okay. Yeah.
Where you are.
Hurricane.
In the summer, you can get thunderstorms pop up, in pretty much any conditions.
And isolated, right? So how much of an atmospheric disruption would there actually be in like a little isolated thunderstorm? Would it be enough to trip off something like I don't know. I don't understand it enough maybe, but
I don't think so. I think maybe very hyper localized, you'd get an appreciable drop in atmospheric pressure, but those are typically like super large scale things.
Yeah.
Unless you're caught in a tornado or something. You're not going to get like one thunderstorm dropping the pressure, so much so that it would maybe tip off this storm alert thing. It's just like, it's not big enough. So in the summer, you're not gonna, don't get fooled just because there's no storm alert going off. Don't think that you're in the clear.
Yeah,
As lightning is thundering around you.
totally.
You guys are way more advanced than I am. Or my wife. Neither of us have barometric altimeters or storm alerts on our watches.
I don't have a storm alert
Useless.
either. Well, what kind of running
It
watch
sounds
do
like
you
we're
have?
not missing much, so that's okay.
Yeah.
Adam has a 1990 Ford running watch. No,
Yeah.
what do you have?
Little,
Runs on diesel.
it's a Timex. I don't know if you guys are aware of that. It's a pretty big brand.
Oh.
No, it's I got it refurbished in probably 2016. It's a Garmin 920 XT.
Okay.
So probably even a couple years older than when I got it potentially. But
Yeah.
So it's a refrigerator on your wrist
yeah.
that doesn't have a barometric altimeter.
Well,
What's
does
that?
it?
I said, so it's basically a refrigerator on your wrist that doesn't have a barometric altimeter.
Oh, pretty much. And it won't even store my food either. So
Anyway, we have like one
connect to
more.
Strava though. That's the big
Yes,
question.
absolutely. Okay, yeah,
Does
we
it
had
give
one
you
more.
altitude though? Does it give you like elevation gain and lost on a?
yeah, it does give me that.
So
Yeah.
it probably does have some sort of barometer on there.
Unless it's pulling it from GPS.
I mean, I don't know that much about running watches. I would assume that. I know Garmin are more expensive, but I feel like, 7 years ago or whatever, that it had to be more top of the line to get that, but I could be 100% wrong on that.
This is a little tiny digression, but when I was really young, I was into hiking, and my dad was actually like, my dad was an earth science teacher, studied meteorology, all this stuff.
Yeah.
So I was a dork and, probably following in his footsteps or whatever. And for like my 11th or 12th birthday or something like that, he got me a watch with a barometer in it. And I was like,
Oh, cool.
so enthralled with this freaking watch. It was huge, because this is like 2001 or 2002 or
Yeah.
something like that. And I have this huge watch on my wrist. And then I brought it to the beach and got sand in it, and it was no good. Anyway, I think we have one more question, Adam, if you wanted to ask him that last one.
Oh, yeah. So since we can't predict an inversion, any other cool weather phenomenon we should have an eye out for?
So, for me, like, honestly, one of the coolest things about being in the mountains and mountain running is, in terms of weather phenomena, is maybe just not one, but just soaking in just the sheer amount of different weather you can experience in literally one outing. I've been up in the mountains in Colorado where like I've literally been like, I've had a blizzard on me in like July, and then a half an hour later have it be, sunny and slightly breezy and just absolutely perfect for running. Like just getting like all that different weather in like one experience is like, I mean, that's a huge part of the reason I love being outside here and I love trail running, is because you get to experience all of that in one go. I love, we talked about this before. I mean, running through clouds and everything like that. I mean, it gives you this really cool perspective and experience. I mean, when you do that on even trails you've run like a million times, running through like fog or a thick snowstorm or something like that, just kind of gives you like, for me, for trail running, I love racing and everything, but I do it more for like the adventure aspect. And I love, having weather play like an integral role in that. Running through a blizzard on trails that I've run like a million times and having it feel completely different and making it feel, even if I'm a mile away from my house, still feel like I'm out in the middle of nowhere. it's one of those things where, if you do it safely and everything like that, like embrace the weather that you're experiencing on your run and you know, make it part of, why you like being out there and everything. I don't know if you all have, other things that you've seen or like to run in terms of weather, but
I've seen some
that's
cool stuff. Climbing up longs once, there were a bunch of these like little snow nados. That
oh
was
cool.
cool. I got caught in some grapple. So basically
Mhm.
like raining dipping dots basically.
Yep.
It's associated with like thunder snow, and it's more common in the Wasatch, I guess, which is where I was caught in it. But that was
Mhm.
super cool. Or just thunder snow in general is pretty cool.
Grapple can hurt. I've been in grapple where I'm like, man,
it was soft. It was
that's good.
legitimately like dipping dots were falling from the sky. It
Yeah, it's
was
cool.
it was interesting. And then just gotten caught. I've gotten caught in some weird thunderstorms and stuff. That's cool after the fact. But
Yeah.
and then there was this post, I guess Chris Tomer shared this. He's like a local celebrity meteorologist, if you don't know who he is, but down in Denver, News 7 or something. But anyway, he posted on his social media maybe 2 years ago or something. There was like a tornado in Rocky Mountain National Park, or
Yeah,
at least looked like it was. And I guess
yep. I've
maybe
seen that.
maybe it was like North Park or something behind. I don't know.
Yeah, it
But
was like someone on Longs, I think, took the video, I want to say.
yeah, like holy, like that is the fuel of nightmares. But
Yeah.
um stuff like weather is super cool.
Yeah, I've seen that. And I know there's some debate on whether or not that actually was a tornado and if it could have formed. Uh, but yeah, that was really something else. I love here running in the winter, you get they're called lenticular clouds, which
Mhm.
I'm sure everyone here is familiar with. They're the clouds that look like UFOs when you're running in the winter. Those are spectacular. I love running at sunrise or sunset and seeing them in like orange and purple hues and all that.
Yeah.
Um, those are those are neat.
Yeah, those are usually more common in like those monarch mountain ranges or whatever you want to call them, you know what I mean? Like where there's kind of large, prominent peaks like the Tetons, right? Like Mount Rainier.
Mhm.
Isn't that when they're more definitely more common in that kind of situation?
Oh yeah, you can totally see those a lot on like throughout the year on taller mountains. But you can get them, here in the Front Range. So I mean, they form. I don't know how much you want me to nerd out, and I can cut out right. um, but I think they're really cool because they typically form. You see them a lot in the winter here, and less so in the summer. And that is because in the winter you do get that stable atmosphere, and in a stable atmosphere, air doesn't want to go up or down vertically. And so when you have air coming and hitting mountains and getting forced over, what you're literally seeing with those clouds is you're seeing air getting forced upwards to the point where it, saturates and forms a cloud. And then you're seeing it, those clouds are like quasi-stationary basically. So the cloud looks like it's stationary, but it's kind of like a standing wave where like everything in that cloud is being basically advected, downwind. So you're literally seeing air condense, form a cloud, and as it moves across it basically goes back down in the atmosphere when it goes over the mountains, and as it goes back down it dries out and the cloud evaporates. And I it's just really cool to see sort of the atmosphere in action. The atmosphere is a lot like the ocean. It's got waves and tides even, and they you often don't see that stuff unless there's clouds. And so it's cool to see how the atmosphere works, from varying from winter to summer basically, and how things change. It's cool to experience as you're
Yeah.
outside.
Well, except, speaking of wave clouds and cool to experience or not, you remember that time we were doing that multi-pitch in the Boulder Canyon? in Boulder Canyon.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it was like super freaking windy and we were freezing and we had to
Yep.
bail.
And we
And it
had
was
to
because,
bail, like, kind of sort of
yeah,
sketchy.
well, and the reason why this is relevant is because it was so freezing. All we needed was the sun, but the sun was stuck behind that wave cloud
Yep.
that would not go away because it was just like evaporating on one side, but then like building itself back up on the other side. Those clouds
Can be
suck.
tough to forecast too. There's a lot of big forecast busts in the Front Range is when you have like a big wave cloud that sits over, and all of a sudden your forecast high is like 10 degrees cooler than what it was supposed to be.
And it's usually windy. I feel like usually when there's a big wave cloud sitting on the Front Range, it's usually
yeah,
windy
sometimes
too, right?
it can get super windy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And sort of the same concept for when it can get windy, just more on the surface. You know, it's sort of like rolling a bowling ball off of the top of a hill. You know, when you have stable air that's being pushed over a mountain at the surface, it goes over the mountain, and it's stable, and it wants to go back to where it was. So it basically starts barreling down the mountain. It warms up as it does. You know, so here in the Front Range, you know, in the winter, it's very different. You know, I'm from Wisconsin, where it's steel gray skies and cold from like November to April. But like here, it's you know, it could be mid-January, but it's, you know, 55 out and sunny. But the downside is it's like 50-mile-per-hour winds is on top of the 50 degrees.
It's the worst.
Yep, and those are all related, you know, like it's called downsloping, and that's you know, the mountains basically trigger that. It's pretty interesting, and also pretty crappy to run in. Pretty awful. Yeah. Just like it's been for the past like month here. I feel like it's been super windy.
Yeah. I feel like it's been more than a month.
Terrible.
Yeah. I always try to plan my runs. Speaking of forecasting and looking for things, I always try to plan my runs where I'm like, the first half I'm running west into it, and at least for the second half I have the wind to my back.
Oh boy. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, Brad, you're obviously a wealth of knowledge when it comes to weather. And so, yeah, it's been great having you. Did either of you guys have anything else you wanted to say or talk about?
No, I didn't have anything. This is great. Thanks for coming on, Brad.
Yeah, thanks for having me on and let me talk your ear off on weather nerd stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, everybody, I hope you learned something new about the weather and can incorporate it into your training and adventuring. Otherwise, just get out there, go make some strides.
Make some strides.
Bye, everybody.